Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I hope that you are all good. In today's video we're going to be talking coloured acrylic, and I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks on how I like to use coloured acrylic. First of all, I have already applied my Kiki London peel off base coat, my tips and a thin layer of clear acrylic. If you would like to see a video on the Kiki London peel off base coat, then do let me know in the comments below. For today's coloured acrylic, I'm mainly going to be using Blurple, which is from CJP, and it is this gorgeous kind of shimmery purple shade. It is super cute, and I wanted to do a set of nails with it, and I thought it would make a good video to talk coloured acrylic. Now there are a few different types of coloured acrylic, mainly those that can be used as strength powders and those that need to be encapsulated, and it's going to depend on the brand you're using, and even sometimes the brand have those two types to offer. So for example, I know with CJP they have certain colours that have a little cap on them, and these need to be encapsulated, and then they have ones that don't need to be encapsulated, so you can build the full nail with them. Personally, I always like to cap my coloured acrylics anyway. For one, I just find that it wears better, and two, it makes your coloured acrylic last longer, and then you're replacing your clear acrylic more than your coloured acrylics, if that makes sense. So in this video we're going to do a few different designs with the coloured acrylic. We're going to do an ombre on the middle finger, and then on the pointer and little finger we're going to do kind of like a fade towards the tip with some glitter, and then on the ring finger we're going to do a full Blurple nail. Now I like to go in with my coloured acrylic and use it fairly thin, kind of like a patting and pressing motion with it, but then I'll go into more of a painting motion, so I mix up both of those techniques. Now I like to use it thin because we're going to be encapsulating it and we don't want to end up with a thick bulky nail, and two, because if I'm adding on things like glitters, I want to make sure that I'm able to layer up the coloured acrylic and the glitter. Now you would have seen on both of these nails I come in with the colour fairly thin, patted it out from side to side, and then just painted or pulled it down to where I want it to go. Now here at the cuticle area you want to still be really neat. You want to work with your coloured acrylic very similar to how you would work with your core colour, but you just want to keep it nice and thin. Now with some of these more shimmery coloured acrylics, I do find them a little bit easier to work with than solid colours. So if you're new to coloured acrylics, I would recommend trying some of those, either ones that are shimmery or ones that have a bit of glitter. Now on this nail we're going to be doing a full nail of Blurple, so you can come in and apply this by starting at the cuticle area or at the tip of the nail, depending on how you prefer. But like I mentioned, I still like to apply it nice and thin, kind of like paint it on, make sure I've got good coverage of the color, but I won't be building up the strength and structure of the nail. Because these colors from CJP that I'm using today are able to build up a little bit of strength, I'll paint them on a little bit thicker than colors that don't have those strengthening properties, but I still like to keep it on the thin side and then just come in and encapsulate. So you'll see as well, a lot of the time when you're using colored acrylics, it really stains up your brush, so you can see a lot of color going into the brush. So I like to make sure I'm giving it a good wipe before I go back into my monomer. Now I won't do this as much if I'm using a core color, but it's very similar to if you're working with white. The pigmentation really sticks into your brush. It's not necessarily the actual acrylic sticking into your brush, it's just some of those pigmentation particles. And then if you wipe off your brush once, for example, and then go into your monomer, it ends up clouding your monomer because you're adding some of that color to your monomer. And then when it comes to encapsulating, if you didn't change your monomer, your clear acrylic wouldn't look as clear. So what I like to do is make sure that I'm really consistently, regularly wiping my brush on my paper towel before I go back into my monomer. If I feel as though there's a lot of color in my brush, I'll very lightly dip my brush into the monomer and then clean off again. Another thing when I'm working with colored acrylic and obviously using my monomer, because you need to, but another thing is I'll just use a small amount of monomer at a time. So for example, I've just got a small amount in my dish, so I'm mainly going to use this monomer for my colored acrylic, my design work, and then if I need to, if it does look a little bit cloudy, I can change it up for some fresh monomer when it comes to encapsulating in my clear. This way you're going to get that crystal clear from your clear acrylic because you've got nice, clean, fresh monomer. It's similar to when you're working with glittered acrylics as well. you can try and be as clean as possible with your brush, but there's still that chance that you're going to get glitter in your monomer, especially when you're working with acrylics that have very fine glitter in them. So I like to make sure I'm just using a small amount of monomer, enough to get me through the design work of the set, and then I'm not going to have loads to throw away, but I can throw that small amount that's left away and go in with some fresh monomer for encapsulating. Now, coloured acrylic is really easy to work with, in my opinion. I like to just work with small beads, use that painting motion, and there's not too much to think about because you're going to come in and add your strength and structure when you're doing your encapsulation. Now, another thing when I'm working with coloured acrylics doing a set like this, I'll try and do a lot of the coloured acrylic work first and then come in with my glitters and things like that after. One, because I'm going to be layering up the design, and then it allows the coloured acrylic to dry before I start pressing and applying my glitter over the top, especially when you're working with highly pigmented colours. If I'd have done this glitter straight after applying the purple, it would have just needed a few seconds to set. So it's easier sometimes to just go in and do all the coloured work if possible, and then come in and apply your glitter after. This way your coloured acrylic has dried and you're not going to be moving it around or cloudying up the tip of the nail with the purple whilst you're applying the glitter, especially when you're wanting to fade your coloured acrylics into clear tips like we've done on this nail. So it's a lot easier to let that coloured acrylic dry first and then come in and apply your glitters. Depending on how I'm doing, I might not necessarily always do it this way, but if I was working in a salon on clients, this is the way I would do it for ease. One, because if I need to change up my monomer, I can. I've got all my coloured work out of the way. And two, like I said, it gives time for it to dry. Now, I find coloured acrylics pair beautifully with raw glitters. You will find so many colour combinations that just work. For example, like look how beautiful these two glitters work with my coloured acrylic. Now, it is really important that if you know you're going to be layering up your design, so like I knew here I was going to be layering up with glitter, that you keep your coloured acrylic application nice and thin. So when I was applying these, I pretty much just painted on small beads of coloured acrylic, so it's not added any thickness or bulk, especially at that cuticle area. And then when I come in with my glitter, I'm just going to pick up a very teeny tiny bead of clear acrylic, dip into my raw glitters and apply them. Now here I wanted to use two separate raw glitters, a finer one and a chunkier one. So I knew at the start that I was going to be adding some bulk to the nail. So by keeping that coloured acrylic nice and thin, I can layer up my glitters without stressing about the end result being a thick bulky nail. Everything is still looking super thin. Now down at that cuticle area, again, you're going to want to keep your coloured acrylic nice and thin because we're going to come in and encapsulate. Now when I'm doing a coloured acrylic ombre like I did on the first nail, I always blend in the coloured acrylic to the natural nail bed, then I allow that to dry. So we've moved on, we've done the rest of the nails, and then I'm going to come in with my core colour. So today I'm using CJP's Obsession. I've picked up a medium-sized bead of this, placed it down at the cuticle area, patted it from side to side, and then we're gently going to feather this down over Blurple. Because we blended it in to the natural nail bed, we haven't got this harsh line to cover up. We softened our colour when we were blending it into that natural nail bed. This then makes it a lot easier when you come in with your core colour to blend it over the top. This is especially important if you're working with bright or dark shades where they're going to show up through your through your core powder. So for example, Obsession is quite a opaque core color, but it's not as opaque as some. So if you had a harsh line and you didn't want to apply this too thickly, there is a chance that you would see that through the Obsession. So by blending Blurple into my natural nail bed, I didn't have that harsh line to cover up, so I didn't have to stress at all when it come to applying my core color and creating my ombre. Now, whenever you are working with coloured acrylics and glitters, you are going to need to encapsulate. But like I said, even with my ring finger, I kept my coloured acrylic nice and thin, so I'm going to encapsulate anyway. So we're going to come in and encapsulate all of these nails. I'm encapsulating using Diamond Nail Supply's Clarity. This is my favourite clear acrylic. So Lots of people encapsulate in different ways. Even myself, sometimes I like to change it up. But today I'm starting off by encapsulating the tip first and then working my way up towards the cuticle area. This is probably the way I find easiest because a lot of that strength and structure you're putting in is in the apex area. So I just find it easier to keep everything nice and thin at the tip of the nail and then build up my structure as we're going up towards that apex area. Now, when you are building your encapsulation layer, it's going to differ slightly depending on the length of the nails, but you always want to have your apex in the back third of the nail. You want to keep your cuticle area nice and thin and flush, and then build in to your apex area. And then I like to have a little bit of thickness running down the spine of the nail, so right down the center of the entire nail, especially when I'm wearing longer nails like these. That's not something you have to stress about as much on shorter nails, but on longer nails you definitely want to make sure that you're got your strength and structure there so that you're not going to get the nails snapping off within a few days. Now again, when I'm working on longer nails, I am going to do encapsulation with a couple of beads because personally I like to work with smaller bead lately. Back in the day I used to have I think it was like a size 14 to 16 brush and would always work with larger beads, but the last year or so I've much preferred working with a smaller brush and smaller beads. Of course, these things are just personal preference and come down to what you prefer working with. But whenever I work with coloured acrylic, I like to make sure that I'm keeping everything on the thin to medium side and then building up all of my strength and structure with my clear acrylic. Now on this now, you would have seen I've encapsulated slightly differently. I only really need to encapsulate the purple part of the nail and the fade because we don't want to file that off, because the core color I've used is also a strength powder, but I've built up a lot of my apex with that core color when I was creating my ombre. So when I come in and encapsulated that nail, I focus encapsulating from the fade downwards, and this would have been similar if I'd have done a glitter fade. For example, a lot of the time if I know I'm going to be using a core color for my ombre or glitter fade, I will build up my apex with that, if that makes sense, and then just encapsulate from the fade downwards. On this finger here where we've done our full color nail, I've encapsulated the entire nail the same way I did the glitter fade nail, because we're wanting to build up that strength and structure over the entire nail, even though it is just a plain nail. Now if you didn't want to do it this way, if you wanted to use your colored acrylic as your strength powder, you would have simply built up the nail the same way you would do if it was a nude or a clear. But if you are doing it this way, just make sure that your colored acrylic is a strength powder and not one that needs to be encapsulated. Now there's a few other things I wanted to mention about colored acrylic. One of them is that I find certain colored acrylics can stain the natural nail bed. So if you're working with say neons or brights or even some darker shades like black or navy, reds as well are terrible for it. They can stain the natural nail bed. So when it comes to removing them, you're going to have this stained look on the natural nail bed. So I always like to apply a thin clear base anyway, but just in case you don't, if I was working with colored acrylic, I would definitely come in, apply my tips and a complete thin clear layer from cuticle to tip, then come in and apply my colored acrylic. This way you're not going to get any staining of the natural nail bed. And I also find personally that clear acrylic, especially on myself, I'm a problematic lifter. For years it took me a while to master not getting lifting on my nails, and one of the biggest things I found with acrylics is I don't get any lifting if I apply a layer of clear acrylic first of all. So that's why in all of my videos you'll see that I start off with my tips and a thin clear layer. A lot of the time if I'm creating videos for content, I won't take that clear layer all the way down to the cuticle area, but if I was working on a client or a family friend, or if I was doing a set of nails to wear for a couple of weeks, I would do a complete thin clear layer from cuticle area to the tip, keeping it nice and thin because we don't want to obviously add any bulk if we're going to come over the top with colored acrylic, glitter, etc. Then I would come in, apply my colored acrylic, whether it be a full nail, an ombre, a glitter fade, marble, whatever it is you're doing, and then I would encapsulate with my clear layer. So my colored acrylic is sandwiched between two layers of clear. I find this way coloured acrylic is going to be the strongest. It is personally for me. So I find that way, if I know that it's sandwiched between two layers of clear, I've got a nice strong structure to the nail. Another thing that I wanted to mention is not all coloured acrylics are the same. You know, quality, as we all know, differs from brand to brand, but when it comes to coloured acrylic, I find the consistency differs quite a lot from brand to brand. Certain brands, you can pick up your bead of coloured acrylic and work with it exactly the same way you would your core colours, and then other brands, I find you just can't do that. It has to be painted on. It doesn't work as nicely to pick up a bead of acrylic. So if you are looking to try a new brand, I would definitely say try a core color and a colored acrylic and see what works for you. And then again, sometimes even between the same brand, colors, the pigment that they add to the colored acrylic can really affect the way that colored acrylic works. I always find neons a little bit harder to apply than, say, solid colors. Pastels as well, sometimes they can be a little bit trickier to work with, so sometimes you do have to play around with the ratio to get the colored acrylic to work for you. But I absolutely love colored acrylic. It is one of my go-to favorite products if I'm going to sit down and just play and do nails. I think the possibilities are endless, whether it be ombres, color blocking, marbles. You can have so much fun with colored acrylic. Now, if you would like to see more colored acrylic videos, do let me know in the comments below, as I'm really getting back into doing acrylic nails and finding my love for them again. So I would love to do some more tutorial style videos on them. So if there is anything you would like to see, let me know in the comments below and I will see what I can do. Let's jump back to this video. Once I had finished all of my encapsulation layer, we're going to come in and file. Now for filing, I try to use the same routine, which I come in first of all, and we'll talk about a bit more on the next now, actually, the routine. But I do find it a lot easier to start with a 100 grit file, and then I'll do all of the nails with my 100 grit file, and then I'll switch to a 180 grit file. When I'm using my 100 grit file, I don't go too closely around the cuticle area. I use my 180 grit file for that, and I always like to finish my file, my shaping, with my 180 grit file as well. So let's talk routine. I like to go in flat up against the sidewalls with my 100 grit file, bring that sharp shape back as much as I can, and then I'll go in and debulk. So I'm going to go up one side of the nail, around and over the apex, and then over the other side of the nail, and then I'll just go over the entire nail with my 100 grit file, just to debulk any thickness, the unnecessary thickness that's there, any unevenness that's there. Just contour and refine that nail. I'm going to clean up just ever so slightly underneath the nail if any of the acrylic has come off the sidewalls, because we want to make sure that we've got that sharp shape. And then once I've done that on all of the nails, I'm going to switch to the 180 file. Now the 180 file, I'm going to focus going around the cuticle area with this. It's a little bit softer, a little bit gentler, and then because it's a finer grit file, it's not going to take off as much acrylic as what the 100 grit file would have. Because I applied my acrylic quite thin at that cuticle area, I don't necessarily want to take too much off. I just literally want to go over with a few swipes, get it nice and flush and refine everything. So I prefer to do this with the 180 grit side of a file. And then I always like to finish off shaping with a 180 grit file. I feel as though it just gives you that super sharp, crisp shape to the acrylic. So I literally finish up with my 100 grit file and then go in and do those steps with my 180 grit file. Usually then I do come over and gently buff the nails with a little buffing block. I completely forgot to do that in today's video, but it isn't necessary if you're going to be using a gel top coat anyway. But I do just find it helps minimize the scratches that are in the nails. But like I said, if you're using a gel top coat, that's not necessarily noticeable anyway. Once you have finished doing all your filing, of course, you're going to want to come in and give the nails a good scrub. So I like to go in and scrub them with a dry brush, and then I usually go over with some alcohol. But I've been doing my nails a lot lately, and alcohol is just a little bit harsh, so I'm just going in with some micellar water, you know, the cleansing water that's designed to take off your eye makeup or makeup. I've just give them a good scrub with that, and then because I want to make sure that there's no oils from that left on the surface of the nails, I'm just wiping over the nails with a little bit of alcohol. This is just because my skin is just being a little bit sensitive at the moment, and constantly going in with alcohol is really drying them out. Then we're ready to come in and top coat and bring back all of the life to these nails. Something I love about working with coloured acrylic and glitter acrylic as well is that when you do your encapsulation layer and your filing, everything goes quite matte and dull, and then you come in with your gel top coat and it all just comes back to life and looks so pretty, especially when you're working with glitters. So I'm going to take my Kiki London no wipe top coat. I was using an old bottle here. I'm at the very bottom of this one. I need to get a new one out, so I was struggling to get some out of the bottle, but you need to go over, apply this to your entire nail. Of course, I want to keep it nice and neat up at that cuticle area, avoiding getting any on the skin or cuticles. And then a lot of the time with these kind of glass clear tip nails, I will top coat underneath as well, because I was only doing this set for content, for a play around, for a video. I wasn't leaving these on, so I didn't do that. But if you want to get a crystal clear tip, then just go in and top coat underneath the nail. Make sure it's fully clear of dust first of all, and then this gives you that super clear crystal finish. And then this was the finished set. I absolutely loved this purple shade. It is absolutely gorgeous. Purple is one of my favorite colors, especially to do nails with, but this color especially, I think it's beautiful for kind of like a late spring look, and it paired beautifully with the glitters. So I'm going to go in lastly and apply a little bit of cuticle oil, and then guys, that's going to take us to the end of today's video. I really hope you all enjoyed watching. Do let me know in the comments below how you're all doing. I love checking in with you all. And then yeah, I shall hopefully see you all again in the next video. If you did enjoy today's video, please do give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment below, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, I would absolutely love it if you hit that subscription button. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. Lots of love, take care, bye bye.